All right, so today I'd like to talk to you about mindfulness-based stress reduction, or MBSR for short, which, although it has certain elements that some of you will already be familiar with, they've never really been spoken about at great length from a poker mental game standpoint, as far as I know. And actually, when I first began learning about MBSR, it really had nothing to do with poker at all. I originally got interested in it while searching for a way to decrease my stress levels away from the table, while also trying to increase my overall sense of happiness and fulfillment in a bunch of different areas of my life. Because having battled with depression for most of my life, this often felt like a goal that was too abstract to even strive for, really, and most likely one that would be too difficult to accomplish. But fortunately, after 15 years of failed attempts, I happened to totally at random stumble on a talk by a man named John Kabat-Zinn that honestly changed my life. In fact, the MBSR program made such an impact on me that it became one of the key components of my counseling practice, and is usually the very first thing I focus on when working with new clients, since I really haven't found anything else that can make as much of an impact in as short of a period of time across so many different problems with so many different people. So, as I was practicing MBSR and began to observe the benefits that the program was having in my own life, as well as the lives of those around me, I decided to modify it and incorporate it into my poker game, where I'd long since struggled with weak mental tilt and weak emotional control. So, after a number of alterations and adjustments to the program, I was eventually able to create an MBSR-like program that completely changed the way I played the game, which I then nicknamed Mindfulness-Based Poker Stress Reduction, or MBPSR for short. So my goal for today then is to briefly describe the basic tenets of MBSR, and then to present the ways in which I've incorporated them into my daily poker grind in order to increase my mental and emotional control, while also decreasing the frequency and severity of my tilts. But before I get into that, let's spend a quick second getting ourselves anchored into the present moment by turning the spotlight of our attention inwardly and observing the workings of our own bodies in order to gain insight into our current mental and emotional state and to introduce us to some of the ideas that I'll be talking about later on. I'd like you to start by lowering your gaze or even closing your eyes if that feels comfortable, so as to minimize visual distractions. Now, I'd like you to turn your attention to the sensations of your face. Specifically, pay attention to your forehead or brow area. Does it feel relaxed and unstrained, or is it scrunched up into a tight little mass of stress? Next, move your attention down to your jaw. Can you note any sensations here? Does it feel clenched, or are you gritting or even grinding your teeth? If you gently massage the sides of your jawbone right below where your earlobes are, do you feel tenderness or even pain? And what about your chest or your diaphragm or the area we commonly think of as the heart? Do you feel them expanding fully and completely with each breath you take, or do you find them feeling more tight and constricted? Finally, move your attention down to your stomach and note, does it feel comfortable and at ease, or can you locate some tension here too? Take a moment and spend it reviewing all these areas, your forehead, your jaw, your chest, your heart, and your stomach. And if you find yourself noticing signs of stress in any of these areas, try taking a couple of deep breaths as if you were breathing right into the areas that were most tense. Don't try and change anything, just breathe into them and observe how that affects the sensations. Nice long breath in through the nose, and an equally long breath out through the mouth. In through the nose, and out through the mouth. Now, quickly do one last scan of all these areas again. Forehead, jaw, chest, heart, and stomach. And see if you can detect any improvement from the first scan, even if it's only slight. So, the reason we focus in on those parts of ourselves specifically is because they're kind of like the universal epicenters for stress and tension. Pretty much the signposts for negative emotions in the human body. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but first let me take a quick moment to introduce the basics of mindfulness-based stress reduction for those who may not be familiar with it already. But since we could easily fill an entire separate video pack with MBSR program and its varied uses and methods of implementation, I'll do my best to give you a very succinct rundown of its tenets and then move on to how I've utilized and adapted the program to improve my mental game at the poker table. So MBSR was originally developed at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center in 1979 by a molecular biologist named Dr. John Kabat-Zinn, and he did so as a way to help treat chronic pain patients and patients suffering from anxiety, from stress, and from depression that had proven resistant to other medical interventions. So now, nearly 35 years later, the UMass program has gained international recognition, and the MBSR program itself has been implemented in over 250 medical centers in the US alone and countless others worldwide. So simply stated, mindfulness-based stress reduction is a specific set of practices intended to help us become more present in our day-to-day and moment-to-moment life by teaching us how to get past the mental fog that we so often find ourselves in. And if you're not sure what I mean by mental fog, ask yourself whether you've ever been behind the wheel of a car and suddenly realized you hadn't really been paying attention since you started driving and had instead just been functioning on autopilot. Or whether you've ever found yourself still angry about a bad poker session hours or even days after it was over. Or whether you've ever tried watching a training video like this one only to give up after watching the same section 3 times over without actually ever hearing a single word. Because I think it's pretty safe to say that we all experience some of those moments and plenty others like them on a pretty relatively consistent basis. So MBSR, for its part, contends that rather than experiencing these situations every once in a while, we actually spend most of our days and pretty much the majority of our lives trapped inside one long string of them. So the key then, according to MBSR, is to emerge from this mindless state by learning to experience the present moment as a desirable moment in and of itself. So if that's the case, how do we go about achieving this seemingly lofty goal? Well, I think according to MBSR, the answer to that is quite simple actually. Mindful meditation. Now, if you're anything like me, the idea of meditation in its most commonly known form, the clearing your mind / not thinking anything BS we see in the movies and on TV, seems like a total and utter impossibility. And I think in my opinion, the reason that's the case is that it pretty much is. I mean, the vast majority of us can't make it through 3 full deep breaths without 1 or even a dozen thoughts racing through our minds. And if you don't believe me, go ahead and try it. Take 3 full deep inhalations and 3 equally large exhalations and see how far you make it before you catch yourself thinking something like, damn, I'm hungry, or this is dumb, or God, I can't believe how hard I spewed last session. I know that the few times I attempted to meditate in the traditional sense prior to finding MBSR, it literally wouldn't take me more than 5 minutes before I was frustrated as all hell and thinking that it was never going to work. But the reality of it is that that's actually not at all how meditation is intended to be practiced, at least not the MBSR version. In fact, mindful meditation is sort of the exact opposite of that. Rather than trying to push every thought out of our heads, which again is all but impossible, our objective here is to develop more awareness of what's actually going on in our mind and body. We don't work with any mantras, we don't work with any visualizations. All we attempt to do is bring concentrated effort to focusing our attention on the present moment. Sometimes we do this by focusing on our breath. Other times we may observe our thoughts and emotions as they whirl inside us. And other times still we venture outside of ourselves and use our 5 senses to anchor us to the present moment. For example, what sounds can I hear right now? How does my body feel? How does the ground beneath my feet feel? No resistance to what already is, no concern for what will be, only a continuous and relentless observation of the changing nature of our mind and body. Because I think so often the anxiety or fear or procrastination or debilitation that we feel comes as a direct result of focusing our attention on the future, which we can't control, or the past, which we can't change. And in doing so, we forget to just be in this moment, right here and right now. Because the reality of it, of course, is that this moment is the only moment we ever get. All those other moments are just mindful constructs of something that already was, or something that may or may not be in the future. Or to quote Chuck Palahniuk, this is your life, and it's ending 1 minute at a time. So the goal then is to break each activity down to its fundamental elements and experience it in its entirety. To be right there in the moment, within the moment. To appreciate the act of being within the act of doing. But how does this help us improve our poker game? Well, before I can answer that, let me quickly tell you about my own poker mindset history. Perhaps you can find something in it that you can relate to. Basically, shortly after I started playing poker as my primary source of income, I let variance and financial pressures sweep me into a very poor state of mind, and unfortunately I ended up spending probably a good solid year or so trapped in a constant state of permatilt and pretty much making every mistake in the book. I kicked and screamed, I swore, I threw things, I spent each losing day questioning my abilities, and then second guessing every single life decision I'd ever made that led me to that point. It got to a point where I felt like my entire life was spent fighting a losing battle against unhealthy emotional responses that no matter how hard I tried, no matter how many books I read, or how hard I tried to intellectualize variance, I simply couldn't stop myself from letting my emotions control my poker experience. Even as my graph climbed higher and higher, I would still be complaining about how poorly I was running. I remember actually one day in particular when it kind of all came to a head. I had my laptop hooked up to the TV and was sitting there one evening after a particularly brutal cash game session looking over my graph, which actually in hindsight showed pretty reasonable stats and a solid profit incline, but all I could see was that small downward tick at the end. So there I was zooming in and out, looking at every single graph from every single angle over and over again. Some of you may be familiar with the feeling. Just sitting there really soaking in the pain of the session, feeling nothing but anger and self-pity until finally I let out a huge sigh, mumble to myself, "Why do I run so bad?" Suddenly, my amazing wife, who, unbeknownst to me, was sitting across the room watching me torture myself yet again, walked over to the TV and, with a finger trailing along my entire profit line, looked at me with kindness and said, "Babe, this is not running bad." She stopped there for a minute, I remember, to let that sink in, before really summing it all up very nicely. "You gotta get out of your head. You just had a bad day." Of course, as soon as she said it, I felt this overwhelming sense of self-awareness. Here I was, a supposed professional, basically getting mental schooled by an itty-bitty girl who could barely differentiate between a straight and a flush. And the worst part was that she was totally right. I mean, of course she was right, right? I remember feeling a lot of shame in that moment. I remember thinking, what was wrong with me? Why couldn't I get my act together after more than a decade of playing the game? What would people think of me if they knew how big of a mental fish I was? But these questions weren't new to me. These chronic, self-defeating thoughts haunted me session after session, day after day. It honestly sometimes felt like my entire existence was spent on a pot-to-pot basis, each hand threatening to derail the entire ride and send me spiraling down a hole that would take twice the amount of energy to claw out of as the one before. I remember feeling really, really embarrassed in that moment. And I mean, part of me still does. Even today, I still find this hard to talk about. Even as I sit here recording this, my mind is screaming out for me to delete the entire thing and never let anyone know how weak I'd been. But then, that's kind of the whole point, isn't it? My mind is now, just as it was back then, telling me something that is in direct opposition to what I'm trying to accomplish. And my mission, I eventually came to understand, was to sit there and decide whether I would choose to listen to it or not. Because for most of my life, I didn't even realize I had a choice. My mind would decide what I should think or how I should feel, and I would allow myself to get swept along whatever path it chose for me, logic be damned. And from working and talking with others, I feel confident in saying that I'm not alone in this faulty belief. It was really not until I started understanding and implementing the ideas of MBSR into my life that I came to the realization that my mind was just another organ, albeit a high-functioning one, but still, at the end of the day, just another organ. I mean, when one of your other organs does what it's meant to do, like your stomach forcing out some gas, for example, you suddenly question every eating decision you've made in your entire life. You start to wonder whether you'll ever be gas-free again and become depressed when you realize you won't. You start hurling insults at yourself for being such a gassy person. Of course you don't. That would be insane, right? So then, why do we do exactly that when it comes to our minds? Why do we keep treating this organ as the sole authority on what we should and shouldn't be doing and feeling? I've heard Jon Kabat-Zinn say that we should start seeing our thoughts as if they were clouds, floating in, staying for a while, and then dissipating into the great abyss. And while I think this idea paints a fantastic picture of acceptance and honestly really helped me immensely when I was first introduced to it, I've personally come to think of my mind as some sort of big touchscreen computer. Each time a new page pops up, that representing thoughts or emotions, I get to check out what it is, decide if it's interesting or worthwhile enough to explore, and if not, flick my finger and toss it off screen. Because I can honestly say that this single little image, as silly as it might seem, did more to improve my mindset than everything I'd done before combined. And I don't think I'm alone in this belief either. Actually, one of my clients had another great way of internalizing the idea that I thought was totally spot on. He said, it's kind of like when you're at a concert, and even though everyone around you is singing along, you're really only listening to the musicians. You can hear everyone else, sometimes even better than you can hear the band, but you've chosen to focus your attention on a specific target, and everything else is just background noise. Because I think at the end of the day, that's really what we're trying to accomplish here. The understanding that that's exactly what our thoughts are like. Consistent and persistent background noise that for the most part should generally be ignored. Or I guess at the very least put on the back burner so as to enable us to focus on the things that we deem most important. So again, how does this help us in poker? Well, the first step is going to be to use our formal meditative practice to improve our physical self-awareness. Because exactly like aggression in our poker game, the formal guided meditations are going to be the foundation on which all future skills are built. Through these various meditations, which you can consume either through audio recordings or with the help of a practitioner or a meditation group, whatever works best for you, we're going to learn exactly what it means to be mindful and how we go about achieving it. Although I guess that's not really the right word, since one of the key principles in MBSR is that of complete and unyielding acceptance of what already is. So kind of in contrast to some other forms of meditative practices who see themselves as a vehicle to relaxation or enlightenment, MBSR stresses that we should never actually be setting out with the intention of changing or even improving anything. Not even to feel more relaxed or to meditate properly, whatever that means. All we're doing, or I guess all we should be doing, is becoming adept at observing. That's it. Compassionate, non-judgmental observation. Nothing more and nothing less. For me personally, this was an absolute revelation when it came to poker. The understanding that rather than trying to force myself to not feel tilted, as if that ever worked, the idea was simply to be present and observe what being tilted actually meant in this moment. And the great thing is that through the meditative practice, I quickly realized that I actually possessed a sort of built-in tilt compass, as I came to call it. Because what meditation helped me do is become incredibly aware of the specific bodily sensations that indicated a shift in my mindset, those being the emotional signposts that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. And even better than that, I soon learned that once I fully committed to the practice, the process of awakening to these signposts in real time took almost no time at all. In fact, my clients and friends and family that I've introduced to the program have pretty much all reported that even by their second or third session, they'd already began experiencing a distinct and noticeable awareness of their physical responses to emotional stimuli instantly as they occurred. And so just imagine how useful that's going to be for a poker game. I mean, I can't speak for everyone else, but I know that for me personally, no matter how hard I tried, I never seemed able to detect tilt in myself until I was already tilted, I guess. And although that definitely didn't mean it was too late to minimize its effects, it was clearly more beneficial to my bottom line to identify the very earliest signs of mental weakness and to begin employing my strategy for negating it then rather than waiting until I was well within its grasp. So now when I'm sitting at the table, I'll suddenly notice to myself, oh, my jaw just started clenching, or there goes my stomach tensing up again. And from there, once I'm quote unquote awake, all I have to do is move the spotlight of attention from my body to my thoughts, and I can instantly locate the source of the emotion. Because although many of us might understandably assume that the source of our emotion, of our anger or frustration at the table is simply a factor of the last bad beat we took, I think mental game coach Jared Tendler did a absolutely fantastic job of outlining and dissecting the more profound forces at work during tilt. So if you haven't read his first book, definitely check that out. So once I was able to become aware of my destructive emotions immediately as they occurred, I would immediately turn my attention to my thoughts, locate the source of the negativity, which for me personally always seemed to revolve around self-criticism following poor play, or as Jared calls it, mistake tilt, and then utilize my revamped way of relating to my thoughts, be it as the audience members at a concert, pages on a touchscreen computer, or whatever image you come up with that you can connect to most. And basically just swipe them away, sending the related emotions away right along with them. In fact, the amazing thing I eventually started noticing is that simply the act of shining the spotlight of awareness would, in and of itself, often be enough to dissipate the thoughts and emotions completely, with little to no additional effort on my part. And actually, the very first time I got to observe it all in real time was absolutely fascinating to me, so I'd like to share it with you now. Basically, by total chance, I'd been watching an MBSR video of a Jon Kabat-Zinn talk that included a guided meditation right before I was supposed to begin my afternoon session. And so I decided to fulfill my daily meditation quota right there rather than do it after the session ended like I'd been doing up until that point. And looking back at it now, it seems pretty obvious that I should have been using the meditation as a warm-up too. But at the time, I'd been using hand history review as the warm-up, and I'd been saving the meditation as a way to put my sessions behind me and remain motivated for the rest of the day. Either way, I came into this session feeling more focused and present than I ever had. So I played for around 2.5 hours, which is about half an hour longer than I usually play without taking my standard 15-minute break. And actually, since I'd specifically chosen to play in 2-hour blocks based on some optimal session length experimentation I had done earlier on, going beyond it was definitely a mental mistake and probably contributed to the more significant mental slip-up that was about to come. So I'd just taken 2 bad beats in a row in very standard spots to lose back-to-back games to a reg who had sat me and then declined the rematch request, and rather than take it as a compliment, I instantly felt irritated. So when the next match loaded up, which happened to be against a nitty reg that I had on auto-sit, I snapped 3-bet the first hand with some random bluff hand, probably giving off a giant timing tell if my opponent was even the least bit observant. So when Villain flatted my c-bet on an ace-9-9 rainbow flop and the turn brought some random low disconnected card, I knew based on our prior playing history and my opponent's likely perception of my playing style that he literally didn't have one single hand in his entire range that he would not fold. But even knowing this as sure as I knew my name, I still went ahead and shoved, and my opponent predictably snapped me off with aces. The moment the cards flipped over and I saw what I already knew, I felt this incredible surge of emotion burst through my body. I instantly felt my jaw clench like a vice, and my heartbeat seemed to immediately double. Thankfully, these sensations triggered my mindfulness, most likely due to having done the meditation right before the session, so rather than getting swept away by the tilt like I usually would, I got to observe it from kind of a safe distance for the very first time in my life. So as my blood continued to surge through my body, it seemed to ignite every single one of the signposts I mentioned earlier, one after another in quick succession. Remembering my MBSR practice, I quickly moved my attention from my physical state to my mental one, and was met by a barrage of self-criticism and self-doubt. I wasn't so much surprised by the fact that I was having these types of thoughts, since I was pretty used to it by then, but more so by the intensity and forcefulness with which they came. Even within that moment, I can remember already being cognizant of how unhealthy it must be for my mental being if this was the kind of automatic script that I had playing on a loop whenever I got tilted. So as I continued observing my mental and physical processes, again, not trying to stop or change anything, only paying close attention to every fluctuation like an interested observer, I heard myself think something along the lines of, God, I should just quit this game and go spend the rest of my life alone in the woods. So as the statement echoed inside my head, my observing mind responded with a sarcastic, yeah, that's totally not an overreaction at all. Suddenly, I experienced this kind of moment of sort of inner silence, for lack of a better word, and then seemingly out of nowhere, I just burst out laughing. Like literally just rolling on the ground, really killing myself laughing. I mean, I can only imagine just how insane I seemed in that moment, going from a fit of rage to curious detachment to hysterical laughter, all within the span of what was probably like 2 to 3 second tops. I mean, honestly, I must have looked like a literal crazy person. Even as someone who had experienced similar moments of awareness in other areas of my life through meditation, this particular experience of observing and even commentating on my completely ridiculous mental processes under such emotionally charged conditions gave me this incredible aha moment where probably for the first time ever I truly and undeniably understood what Jon Kabat-Zinn meant when he said, "When you see and feel sensations you are experiencing as sensations, pure and simple, you may see that these thoughts about the sensations are useless to you at that moment and that they can actually make things worse than they need to be. So, shortly after this session, armed with this new insight, and once I'd spent some time reflecting on the experience and realized just how powerful and transformative the MBSR program could be for my game, I turned my attention to developing a comprehensive mindfulness-based poker stress reduction program for myself. And after a bit of trial and error and a lot of fine-tuning, this is the program that eventually proved most effective for me personally. So let's review that now. So the very first thing I do is I start off by doing a formal guided meditation immediately before I begin my session, just like I did on that first day. I personally prefer the body scan meditation, which is a meditation that asks you to slowly move your attention from your toes all the way to your head, one body part at a time. Pretty similar to the scan that we did at the beginning of the video. Because I've personally found that this specific exercise really lets me get into my body and become as mindful of its small fluctuations as is possible, which I find really prepares me for noticing even the very earliest signals of tilt or weak mental focus. We won't do the full scan now as it's one of the lengthier meditations, but it will be included in my upcoming MBPSR MP3 pack. Next, once the body scan is over, I go right into the grind and work diligently at remaining mindful for the duration of the session, taking momentary pauses to return to my emotional baseline through mindful breathing, as well as quick scans of my emotional signposts whenever my body tells me it would be beneficial for me to do so. Then, when my session is over, I go straight into the 3-minute breathing space meditation, which I'll discuss in a moment, and from that I move right into an informal meditation practice, which is an MBSR practice of undertaking a generally autopiloted everyday activity with renewed focus and awareness. I personally prefer something that takes a little longer, like washing the dishes or taking a shower, so I can really get back into the present moment and let go of the emotional and mental charge of the session. But if I'm pressed for time, even something as quick as mindfully brushing my teeth or washing my hands and face can have a really significant impact. And to clarify, during the informal practice activity, all we're trying to do is to stay completely present and awake, meaning not to get lost in the endless chatter that constantly plays out in the back of our minds. So if I'm brushing my teeth, for example, I give every aspect of the process my undivided attention. First, I observe my hand taking the toothbrush out of the cupboard. Then I note the sensations on my fingers when I squeeze the toothpaste tube. I feel the sensations of the bristles against my gums. I notice how the toothpaste tastes on my tongue. I listen to all the different sounds as I rinse my mouth out. And finally, I note the sensations on my face as I dry it off with a towel. And if at any point during that process, I find my mind wandering back to the session I just played, or to what I want to eat for dinner, or to some random memory that was triggered by a picture I saw on the wall on the way to the bathroom, all I do is acknowledge where my mind wandered to, once again as a compassionate and non-judgmental observer, and then either let it pass through and dissipate if I can, or if I'm finding it exceedingly difficult to disengage from it, I gently guide my focus to my breath and use it to ground myself back in the present moment, either by actively observing the sensations of my stomach expanding and contracting, or by feeling the air moving in and out of my mouth and nose. And finally, once I've completely released my attachment to the session, but while it's still fresh in my mind, I commit at least 15 to 20 minutes to reviewing hands that I marked off during play, because I've personally found that doing my review at this point really allows me to analyze my mistakes with a level of objectivity and clarity that in the past would normally have taken me much, much longer to reach, which is why I was generally doing my hand history review the following day. And then sometimes if I had a particularly rough day, I might end my review with another 3-minute breathing space meditation, at which point I can pretty much always let any remaining negativity drift away and go about the rest of my day unaffected. Because I've personally found that by stuffing my sessions into this cozy bubble of mindfulness, my emotional control during the grind has absolutely shot through the roof. And even on the days that are a little tougher, spending the time immediately following each session observing my thoughts and emotions has literally eliminated my ability to care about the results beyond those short moments. And really, that's all there is to it. It doesn't sound overly complicated or exceptionally difficult, right? Of course, this is obviously all much simpler in theory than it is in practice, since for most people, the most difficult part is undoubtedly maintaining the relentless commitment to the program that you need, even through the times where your mind seems to be doing everything in its power to deter you from doing so. And trust me, it will do that constantly, time and time again. But much like putting in volume at the table on days you may not completely feel up for it, or watching training videos when you'd rather be playing, it's all about committing to a decision you know will improve your long-term expectation. Okay, so now that we've completed a rough exploration of the mindfulness-based stress reduction and mindfulness-based poker stress reduction programs, and I'd like to reiterate that this is, in fact, a very, very rough exploration. Let's move away from intellectualizing it all and instead shift our attention and close out this video, and actually I guess this video pack, with a 3-minute breathing space meditation to see if we can get a slightly better sense of what mindfulness is all about. But actually, before we do that, since we've reached the end of this pack now, I'd like to take a quick second to thank you all for purchasing it and letting me share some of my journey with you. I truly hope that you found some value in it, be it in poker or otherwise. And I'd also like to say that although I'm not a very enthusiastic self-promoter, knowing from personal experience just how difficult maintaining a sustained dedication to the MBSR program can be, I would truly be honored to accompany you on your own journey and help you create an MBPSR program that's going to be well suited for you personally. So if you're interested in that, here's my contact information and rates for that, as well as my regular one-on-one poker coaching. So now that that's out of the way, let's turn our attention to my very favorite meditation of them all, the 3-minute breathing space. So in mindfulness training, the 3-minute breathing space is taught as a practical tool to manage stress, to feel more centered, and by coming off of autopilot, to be more in control of our responses. And for me, this meditation has become a fantastic instrument in all areas of my life, not just in poker. So if you sometimes feel emotionally overstimulated in any situation, if you suffer from any form of depression, if you have a bad temper, if you feel unmotivated, struggle with attention deficit disorder, anything really, the 3-minute breathing space is an incredible way to get in touch with the root of what you are feeling, and it also allows you to either explore it in a focused and productive manner, or decrease your emotional attachment to it and refocus your attention, depending on what you're trying to accomplish in that moment. And when it came to poker itself, using the 3-minute breathing space in between heads-up matches or during tournament breaks really revolutionized the way I experienced my sessions and allowed me to remain emotionally detached in that healthy manner that so many grinders talk about, but so very few of the ones that I've personally interacted with seemed able to do. But I mean, you don't have to take my word for it. If you're interested, just cue up this recording the next time you play a session, and if at any point you feel yourself straying too far from your emotional baseline, hit the play button and evaluate how you feel 180 seconds later. Because the proof, as they say, is in the pudding. So with that said, let's get underway with our 3-minute breathing space meditation. Taking a breathing space. Start by making a distinct change in your posture so it embodies a feeling of being awake. Perhaps lower your gaze or even close your eyes if that feels comfortable. Now begin the first step by seeing what's in your mind and body right now. What's the weather pattern like inside? What thoughts are present? What feelings are around? What sensations can you notice from both inside and outside the body? Not trying to change anything, but just being open to what's already there. Then, moving on to step 2, bringing your attention to the breath. Narrow the spotlight of attention on sensations of the breath in the abdomen. Tune into the changing physical sensation of the in-breath for its full duration and the out-breath for its full duration. And if at any point the mind wanders, simply note where it went and gently escort it back to the breath. Using these moments to practice now. And finally, step 3, expanding the focus of your awareness around the breath to take in the whole body, as if the whole body was breathing now. Remain aware of your posture, your facial expression, sensations on the surface of the skin, and from right inside the body. Holding in awareness all the sensations in your body right now, just as they are. Coming home to the body. Coming home to this moment.